What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Game Dev Unchained, the #1 game development podcast about game development and the lifestyle thereof. I am your host, Brandon Pham, and welcoming back Tony and Abby from Black Tabby Games. What's up, guys?
What's up, Brandon? Happy to be here.
Just as a reminder for those who didn't listen to the previous episode, if you guys don't mind kind of introducing yourselves again to the listeners out there, just a little intro to where you guys been, where you're at, where are you heading?
Sure. So we're a two-person studio. We make visual novels. Most recently, we released Slay the Princess. That was in October of 2023.
Yeah.
Coming to consoles this fall. We're also localizing it into a bunch of new languages. So should be cool. And we also work on Scarlet Hollow, which is an ongoing episodic visual novel. That one's in early access.
Yeah. As a reminder, you know, we've had you on before for longtime listeners. I was super impressed back then, right? When you guys started your studio in 2019, able to build a community on your own, able to kind of service your community, and your community came through in a big way. And I've been following your latest, Slay the Princess, in the past 6 months, or this year, right? Let's just say that. And I've just seen like this amplified response that I know you guys engineered that. And maybe some of it's luck, but I would love to. I would love to kind of dive into that because it is, as we've seen this year, and even in the Summerfest, how kind of like the games kicked off. Indie development is the innovation the industry needs, especially in these really trying times. Like the old business model is outdated and in a lot of ways hurting the industry. And what I've seen you guys been doing is very inspiring, but also I really do think and feel, if not already, it's paving the way of how developers should start thinking about their products. So would love to kind of go back, you know, kind of take the timeline back to when you guys first produced your first title and the success from that, and going back to the drawing board was kind of where we were talking about talking to each other about last time. Would love to kind of from then on what happened in terms of the planning stage, what you guys thinking. You guys took some time off. How did that Slay the Princess begin development?
So we have not taken any time off,
okay,
ever.
Never stop,
right?
Stop.
So like Slay the Princess sort of popped up in the middle of Scarlet Hollow's development. So like that one again, episodic. We still have 3 more episodes to release before we're done with that story.
Right.
And that one, just like the early access release model, was grinding us to dust.
Mm-hmm.
I think to go back on something you mentioned like a minute or so ago, sort of the idea of the old business model for the games industry failing. I think that it's not so much that, so much as like larger companies have pivoted to a new model that's failing. And I view a lot of what we do as closer to the old model of someone buys a game. Yeah. They own the game. They get all the updates as just part of that experience. And there's no need for like paid DLC or microtransactions or gambling or anything like that. Yeah. So it's like with Scarlet Hollow's release schedule, that has always just been the first episode is available as like a free demo, and then you can buy the full game, and you're not paying like an individual fee for each new content drop. You pay the sticker price once, and then you get the rest of the story as it comes out. On the early access side of things, that was just getting very, very difficult because, like, you know, the kind of the sales graph for a game. I don't know how many of your listeners are audio only or how many will be watching the video, but it's kind of like, right? Like you start off as a huge peak and then it falls off almost immediately. Like we've been blessed with long tails on both of our games, but the general rule of thumb is you get something like 20%, like 10 to 20% of your wish lists at launch as sales, not conversions. It's just that also includes people who see your game for the first time and buy it then. Like you can expect 10 to 20% of that number in like your first week. And then you expect that number again in like maybe your first month. And then you expect that number again in like your first year. So it falls off rapidly. And Scarlet Hollow is like, I think like word of mouth has done a lot for both of our games, and it's really extended the tail, especially since we don't have the budget for huge marketing pushes. So we're generally entering the market like with a hyper focused, very engaged community that then shares our stuff. So we spend more time propagating. So it's like Scarlet Hollow is like doing much better than that curve, and it was having spikes with every new episode release, but like the baseline was still going down and getting kind of sweaty. So with Slay the Princess, it was sort of a move of, you know, in between every episode release, because of how our workflow is structured, I had some downtime. Abby always writes the first draft of new Scarlet Hollow episodes, and I don't start the second draft and coding until she's done with that and starts art. So I'm just doing marketing and business stuff in that time. So like, what if we had a second project we could develop in parallel that uses kind of that dead zone for me better than just like talking to publishers or tweeting really hard.
Yeah.
And then is also less demanding on her from the art side of things, which we sort of lived up to and also did not live up to. Art was very demanding for Slay the Princess in the end.
Yeah. It was kind of built around character.
Sorry, Abby. For some reason, your mic is not working as well as Tony's. Go a little closer. Maybe talk.
Maybe because we're splitting headphones and it's using this one.
Yeah.
Hold on. We can let's try like a slow-mo switch and see if that does it.
That works.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you still hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can hear you. And Abby, if you talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, for some reason, I hear Tony the whole time. I don't hear you, Abby. Yeah.
Can you hear her now?
It's still the same issue, I think. Wonder if it's from the webcam. No, it wouldn't make sense. I hear Tony really well.
I project.
It feels like the mic is next to you for reference.
Look at this. How's this? Is this better?
I hear you, Abby.
Sound better.
There you go.
Better.
Yes, there we go.
Okay, perfect. We've switched to the computer mic, which should be
okay. Okay. No worries.
Yeah, so the art for this was very much built around one character in one location. But of course, that did not turn out to be what the art was, since she's constantly shifting and the entire environment is shifting with her. So I wound up drawing basically the same background in various different forms 25 times. I'm not really sure at this point.
Yeah, but it was like, you know, 4 backgrounds, each of them drawn 24 times.
And of course, like the sprite work is a lot more dynamic than it is in Scarlet Hollow, which was really fun. Yeah. But at the same time, it also meant that there was more of it, because every single action that anything that she did had to have a unique asset for it, which like tends to be the case in Scarlet Hollow anyway, but there's less action in general because you're not fighting another person.
Right.
So.
Right. And the protagonist has visible hands in Slay the Princess and doesn't in Scarlet Hollow. Because like with Scarlet Hollow, we felt it was very important that anyone who plays can kind of self-insert an alternate version of themselves. So instead of going through like all of these sliders for what should this person's hands look like, we just avoid ever portraying it.
Which is actually kind of a challenge compared to just being able to have your hands on things.
Right.
So
the development, there was a couple of things I would love to kind of follow up on. You were talking about like these kind of measures, which I feel like the indie development team, especially those who've been through a couple of rounds, it's a very foreign idea to people who are starting to think about making their own product. But we've heard about it before, you know, wish listing, having some kind of correlation to at least there's some science to it, right? That you can rely on in terms of not exactly conversion, but like a percentage chunk. But you were mentioning like there were timely indicators. You can the first week, the month, in the year. What exactly is happening in those periods that is kind of giving you that type of reliable result within a month or year?
Yeah, so I mean,
these
are all just sort of data-driven points, and like for both of our games, neither of them have followed the standard formula.
Right.
I want to say a lot of these numbers come from an indie dev named Jake Burkett. He worked on Regency Solitaire. He does a lot of number crunching.
Yep.
Very insightful, very active on Twitter. Yeah, there you go.
I've talked to him before.
Yeah, so he crunched some things out, and it works for most people, but games are extremely hype driven, and just so many are coming out all the time,
right?
That unless you're in like a really, really commanding position, either because you're a large player or because you make something that isn't just good, but like touches people to the extent that they have to keep sharing it with other people. Just the fall off is huge. It's dramatic. And like some of this is socially driven and some of it is algorithmically driven by Steam, right? Because Steam is a platform that is optimized around making Steam as much money as it possibly can. So they also know there that, well, new releases are really exciting. And like, I think the platform does a very good job showering like attention on new titles, even smaller ones, and just seeing like, okay, well, when someone sees this page for the first time, do they click? Do they wish list? If it's out, do they buy it? If they buy it, do they refund it? How many hours they put it in? Like they have good data here. And I think it's like the end of the day, the data just says, well, for the most part, people will play a game and they'll move on.
What exactly do you think? I call him Uncle Gabe because Uncle Gabe seems to like slow and steady over the years. They don't have to do anything, but once in a while you hear a rumor that Valve is making a game, but Steam is like their bread and butter, right? It's pretty. But what do you think? Like
a license to print money, right?
Yeah, and they never go above and beyond where they can go supercharge it if they wanted to, but they don't. They just like slow and steady. But what exactly is Steam doing for the smaller teams that other consoles I don't see the same result with? Xbox kind of kicked it off with XBLA and all this stuff. Consoles obviously is still a place for new games to appear, but Steam keeps being like the foundation for a lot of smaller teams to kind of like, we gotta first and foremost make sure we're succeeding on Steam before thinking about anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's bigger, right? It's just bigger than every other platform. I think there is also a tendency where Steam has over the years curated kind of a picture of itself as a place to go for indie stuff, whereas I think a lot of console gamers, they lean more towards first-party games. And that, like, first-party games are often, at least in previous generations, a big reason someone would pick one console over the other. I remember when I was in high school and I got my first console, it was a big, do I get an Xbox or a PlayStation thing? And it was like, well, do you want Halo and Gears of War, or do you want like Demon's Souls and Uncharted? I picked Demon's Souls and Uncharted. But so I think that's part of it. And I do think it's just like, I don't know, like the Steam has this thing, unlike other storefronts, where there's like a habitual browsing behavior in its player base. I want to say, thinking about how I've used different platforms, it's probably a holdover from just how wildly good the deals were on Steam like in the early 2010s, where it's like, ooh, you check in every day and what's the daily deal? What can you get for 80% off? Things were heavily discounted there. And then you also had like lower starting price points than most console games, which were usually retailing at, I don't know, $60. And the deals have gotten like less good over time because I think charging next to nothing for games is an unsustainable business model. It's why I think that a lot of consoles' decisions to pivot into games as a service and like subscription models is unviable for the long term. It just doesn't support the industry. But I don't know, the habit is still there. Like it feels like a cultural thing instead of like just a store you go to every now and then, right? Like if I were to compare it to Epic, great company, lots of really, really great people there, but like I've never used their store other than popping in and claiming a free game and leaving. And I think part of that was for years, their strategy was, I think, trying to mirror like the good deals Steam was cutting, but then they didn't really build functionality or anything around community there, right? It was you go in, you get your free thing, you maybe use a coupon, and then you leave. Whereas like Steam had friends, it had achievements, it had all of these social aspects, forums, reviews. It was a place, and it still is a place where it's like, if you're into games, that's where you go and learn about them, right? Like even today, I will study what other games are doing by looking at their Steam pages and seeing what people are saying there and tracking like, you know, their concurrent players over time or their followers over time. And like that gives me such a clear-headed sense of the industry. And I wouldn't be able to get that sort of insight if I were browsing on a console storefront.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. The Steam ecosystem, it took years to build up. I remember the first time it launched, everybody hated on it. I mean, the experience was actually pretty similar. It didn't change that much from day one. But over time, they just added value. And yeah, same thing with Epic. Besides from claiming games that I never play, you know, I have really killer games.
I just go and buy that game.
Yeah, it's just to take it. But yeah, there's definitely I don't like, they need to separate the game store from their engine. It's this big browser with like a ton of tabs, and Fortnite has its own tab. It's just too much. It doesn't take in the PC experience that, you know, what Steam has. It's like, hey, I'm here to buy games, to play games, and make it very clear.
And it's like they're fighting a really hard uphill battle too, because Steam had so much time in this space, and a lot of people like to say that Steam has a monopoly. I don't think that's true. I don't think they have. They don't really do many, you know, anti-competitive practices, but they do have like this huge, just momentum driven advantage where even ignoring everything else, I'm reluctant to do stuff on Epic because like as a gamer, because I have a library of 1,000 things on Steam. And it's like, well, I'm never going to abandon this library. So it's either there's something that I need. I have to either need this platform to make me boot it up. Which, you know, that'll happen once in a while. I'm an avid Star Rail player right now. And if I'm playing on PC, I have to go through their launcher. But it's like, other than that, like Steam is just going to perpetually be my home base because I bought so many things on there.
Yeah, we're invested. And for the first time, they've talked about when you, unfortunately, when you die, you're not going to be, you can't you're in a will. Which is, I don't know how they're going to control that. I'm leaving my Steam password in my will for my grandchildren.
Just leave it on a Post-it note.
It'll be fine.
What are they going to do?
But I wanted to talk about a bit because I feel like that is an important aspect as a game developer, to understand the gamer habits, especially if you're a smaller team. You are going for PC usually first, and to understand that market is so pivotal for what you kind of plan on kind of dispersing your game, right? And you talked about episodic content for first title, and it is starting to becoming more mainstream, this idea of early access, right? The Ori and the Blind Forest people, not Ori, is it Ori? It is
so
Ori.
They had like a soul, like an isometric Souls like in early,
right? No, something about Nothing for the Wicked or something, but it's an early access. It's a bigger team, and it's kind of becoming more acceptable and honestly supported, because nobody likes developing games for 5 years and it becoming a flop. This early community building with your community, building this niche audience in this game for that audience, the earlier the better. Seems to be a model from teams like yourselves innovated.
I do think, though, that there is a nugget in what you said that's important to unpack, which is your go-to was the Ori developers, which big studio, for an indie, loads of name recognition, large pre-existing audience. And early access is that double-edged sword where it can be a great way to build out a community for a specific game over time.
Yeah.
But if you go into that launch without enough momentum, and that can be either content, that can be a pre-existing community. Pre-existing community is a huge one.
Yeah.
Like, you kind of get locked into something where, you have an obligation to keep working on something that maybe isn't working out.
Right.
So it's like the Ori devs with their new thing. It's like they could go into it and like Supergiant with Hades and Hades 2. They could go into early access for both of those, kind of knowing, well, we're set regardless, and this will probably only make the game bigger.
Yeah.
But I've seen a lot of smaller games try the early access route, and then they get a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 sales over the first however long, and then they're stuck there. And like for us with Scarlet Hollow, when we started the early access thing, we were sort of in a middle ground where we had enough audience to kind of keep the lights on and trudge forward. But it was, it was leading into like a death by 1,000 cuts scenario.
Yeah.
So your mileage may vary.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's also like the structure of the game lent itself to that.
Right.
Versus
sense.
releasing a game where people then get used to the game as it exists, and every change you make to it kind of makes a large subset of your audience say, I liked it better before. Like releasing basically a finished game can be a little bit of an issue versus releasing something where it's not all at once. It's an episodic game. I think that really helped.
And I think with Scarlet Hollow, another thing that's important to think about is like, it's not just episodic, but it's like each episode is almost a self-contained game. It's just nestled within a larger narrative, and your choices carry over. But like,
you have to make sure that like it feels satisfying when an update comes out versus feeling like you're getting just the next chapter in a book, which gets you just a little farther, feeling like you're experiencing something complete that like makes you emotional, that like engages you in that way, and then ends on a cliffhanger to the next one. It's kind of a subtle art, I suppose, to the storytelling there, but
like something to maybe point at. And obviously we are orders of magnitude smaller in scope than this, but like, right, the Mass Effect trilogy, it's 3 games that, you fully play through. They have their own self-contained story from start to finish, but everything you did in the first Mass Effect gets carried over into the second one, and it follows an overarching narrative that contains those smaller ones. So like with Scarlet Hollow, we're sort of doing that on a micro level. So it's like with narrative stuff in particular, unless you are writing a story that kind of just happens to fit the format well, you can wind up getting into a hole where it's like, does someone have a reason to come back for the next episode? Were they satisfied enough with like the one you released? Cliffhangers are important, but then also resolution is important within that structure.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing, having a self-satisfactory experience if you're going to episodically release things and not just kind of do minor patches and be unsatisfied. It is a big concern. Like the pessimistic part of me is that I feel like this is a innovation that the indie development teams were able to use as a way to kind of finance their project successfully, right? And I'm just afraid that bigger teams are just using this as a marketing tool, right? Kind of like how Kickstarter were huge for the smaller development team to kind of finance their games, and then these bigger teams already having all the finance they need just started using it as a market, and it kind of killed it as
a press feed, right?
Yeah, and it really and a lot of unfortunately, a lot of them were scams too. They just stopped finishing the game, and it's like, oh well, that's it, right? So like it hurts, I think, that community. And it's recovering, obviously Kickstarter's still around. There's people still fighting, and the noise died down. Right. But I think in a way it took away a lot of opportunities for smaller teams to thrive if it continued that buzz. I hope that there's a couple things I can see with bigger teams. The investors can pull their money. It's like, well, you're not getting the reception. Thank God, year one we find this out, which is a good thing. I think, like, in a way, it is a good thing. It's like, if it's not working, it's not working. But at the same time, well, maybe giving it a little more time to finesse. That's the whole point, to kind of figure this formula out. But I don't know. I'm hoping I'm kind of want this to just be for smaller teams, because I think it's a perfect model if the design makes sense for it, right, to release things in patches. I think it's great. And I
do think that audiences they differentiate between the two, right?
Yeah, they do.
Like I've noticed people in general, they get more irritated when a giant like AAA studio with tons of VC funding goes into early access and pushes out something half-baked.
Yeah.
And they're a lot more warm and welcoming and friendly to the smaller developers. Like this is just a real aspect of the industry.
There's a lot more sympathy and knowledge about game development in general to average gamers nowadays that I didn't see 2 years ago. It's like gamers are just getting just smarter about the business of games, and overall, not just forgiving, but very supportive of smaller teams. It becomes like a champion topic for them to like, oh, this is developed by 2, 3, 5 people, and that becomes a good part of the conversation of why they're behind the game.
Yeah. And I do think one other note on early access stuff before we close that little book is I think that larger and smaller studios tend to have different approaches to what it means to go into early access. And I think there is like one general rule of thumb, which is regardless of your studio size, you should treat your early access launch as your game's launch, right? Like you are selling it, people are buying and playing it now. It might be unfinished, but like it should have the polish of a full release. And I think smaller studios, when their projects are much smaller in scope, they're able to hit a release level of polish with their early access launch. But like a lot of bigger titles are, even like straight to 1.0 release AAA games are often by their nature as like $200 million projects riddled with bugs, because they're just so unfathomably big and they're on such a tight turnaround that like you can't possibly get everything ironed out when it's ready to go out the door at that budget. So like that's just another differentiating factor. Like for Scarlet Hollow episodes, we have like a week long really, really crunchy period after every launch where I have to find every little bug. It's like the narrative is way too complicated to thoroughly test until thousands of people are playing it. But it's like, those episodes, they are launching as finished, polished products. I think this is part of the reason, Cement bring up Supergiant again, like both Hades games have been like so phenomenal in early access because like there is a complete polished experience there. They're just tuning things and making more of it.
One of the biggest advice has always been have tandem projects going, to be able to, the bigger teams are doing this. They have to, right? To kind of, when something is ending, the another one's beginning to kind of borrow resources. How are you guys balancing two projects at the same time? Given that you guys are such a small team, right? And being able to support both. There might be some overlap in terms of community, but I'm sure there's like new audience in each corner, right? How are you guys able to do this? Was it what you anticipated? Was it more that you guys think we're undertaking? Would love to kind of hear more of your opinions after.
Slay the Princess was definitely more than we anticipated it to be. And part of that was kind of the natural way that the structure of the story kind of progressed. And at the same time, it was also because a lot more people were playing it. So we thought we should make sure that we polish it. So after the demos came out, we could have just kept, if it hadn't kind of taken off the way it did, we could have made it into a much smaller project so that it wouldn't take too much time away from Scarlet Hollow. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that we put out things that we're proud of. So that being said, it did still adhere to the structure that we had laid out for it, which is Tony writes the first draft of the script for Slay the Princess, which means that I'm working on Scarlet Hollow at that time. And then I do edits and I start on art. So that takes me away from the project, but for a less shorter amount of time than it would if I were doing this art style that I use for Scarlet Hollow. So we just kind of tried to pare it down as much as possible to not have too much conflict.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, it was probably for me about 7 months of work. So wow. Not terrible.
Yeah. And I was at like 9 or 10. Like the working on both things in tandem, at least for the script period, was going great until it turned out the scope of episode 5 of Scarlet Hollow is just like double that of episode 4. So it's like I was kind of assuming, okay, so like we will finish the scripts at the same time, and then we'll do the art for Slay the Princess, and then when Slay the Princess is done, like I'll be able to start my next thing with Scarlet Hollow, and we could go.
Yeah, so both projects kind of wound up being bigger than we thought they would.
Well, yeah, I was like, in terms of the expectations we had for timing, like. I think Abby finished about half of the script for episode 5 by the time I started. By the time I finished the first draft of Slay the Princess. So if it had been in line with like the previous 2 chapters scope, would have been perfect. But one of the things that we care about a lot as developers is treating player decisions seriously and making the type of branching stories where even if you pick outcomes that seem bad, you still get something interesting, right? Like there's kind of two things that we've really tried avoiding. And one that is happened a bunch with like the Walking Dead game where, well, there's a decision in episode 1 where a character lives or dies, right? And it's like, if they live, they wind up leaving halfway through episode 2. And not like part of this is Telltale, just like they had to voice act everything. They had to animate everything. Like the burden of keeping a character in the story, much higher than ours. So one, we're avoiding that. And then the other thing is if you make a decision where said character dies, and we do keep them like in the narrative, thinking about this more like a party member in like a BioWare game where sometimes you can make a decision and someone can die and then it's just like there's an empty space there. So like really exploring like in that scenario, how do we make this an interesting decision? How do we make it so that you're not being robbed of content? You're just getting completely different content, but the same amount of it, even though you have one less character.
Yeah, making sure that things are still interesting and that there is a plot around that character, that they still exist in this universe.
Right. And that like, and if they're gone, them being gone means something. It means that they leave a hole behind, and how do other people deal with the hole? How does the story adapt to that hole? But it means that like with every new episode of Scarlet Hollow, we have, yet another large set of outcomes that we want to really be able to explore with it. So it takes a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely a lot of little strings to keep track of.
The process of creating a demo, right? I feel like demo and early access, at least to a gamer or outside of the indie bubble, like it felt like it really became a bigger thing the last 2 years, right? I know Steam has it has its fest for demos dedicated, and I think it's a great idea because there's so much for the gamers to face with in that that Steam store page, right? To be able to play and try before deciding or wish listing has always been a part of a gamer experience. It's just been kind of quiet, I would say, the last decade, but it's kind of becoming a mainstay, a thing that you have to do. Would love to kind of hear your thoughts about that, but also the process of you guys planning for this demo, putting it out. What was the deadlines like? The procedure to the reception? Was it everything that you wanted to? Because it is very. It doesn't get talked about too much. I don't think. I don't. At least when I try to read into it, not a lot of people talk about making sure this demo is a big part of their marketing to get hands-on experience. Yeah.
I think one thing to say before diving into it is, like we mentioned, kind of the importance of like really strong hooky cliffhangers with like episodic releases. I think something very similar plays into designing a good demo. And I think there is this really unfortunate thing where a lot of the skills it takes to make a good video game, which would be a complete experience, are very different than the skills it takes to make a good demo. Because you need to be able to give someone a small slice of an experience that is good enough to make them want to come back for more, but that also isn't so good that it satisfies them. So that's really, really, really hard.
Yeah, something that sticks with people. And makes them remember when they see your game has released, and keeps them wanting to come back. So that's not really something you can, I think, write down a formula for. It's just, it depends on each game, right? Yeah.
How do you prepare for that? Like, how can you, is it just several guesses of how this is how we should tell this story to kind of get people to try this and keep thinking about us until we release? Like, is there a way that you guys found that like helped with keeping interest alive after people demo your game?
I think with Slay the Princess in particular, since this is very like game specific, it was definitely the kind of nature of the short intro to the game. So like the fact that you can play through chapter 1 and then start again at chapter 2 and immediately see that there's a lot to it, and that it can kind of blossom into something huge, which it did. And by huge, of course, I mean like the branching and the way that it can kind of react to your choices. I think that the short nature of that really helped. Like within 15 or 20 minutes, you can kind of show someone what this game could be, and leave it on something that is very intriguing, like just the image of the princess having changed and she has a new name and you have voices in your head that are talking to each other, and you can get more of them, like just kind of hinting at that and having it be something that happens in such a short amount of time. So,
yeah. And it's like both of our games are very, I don't know if twist driven is the way to describe it, but there are enormous, like, dramatic narrative turns in them. So, like, that's just part of how we write. And I think we just have, like, an instinct for, and then here's the good place to cut it off. Where, like, there's a lot of very good narrative games that just have different styles where they're a little more meandering in a good way, but, like, how do you sell that feeling and bring people back for the full release when you're done? I don't know what the answer is there.
Like, even for Scarlet Hollow, I feel we don't have an equivalent to the first Slay the Princess demo. Like, and especially the second, like, you know, any of the Slay the Princess demos, because it does take a little while for you to understand what Scarlet Hollow is doing. I'd say the entire first episode, which can be about an hour or so, depending on how fast you read. Yeah, 1 to 2 hours. That's kind of what you need to form a picture of what Scarlet Hollow is going to be. So, and that's a little bit more of a time commitment. It's a little bit more kind of focused versus being able to go through these chapters really quickly.
How many demos did you guys end up releasing for Slay the Princess before the game release?
Just 2.
Just 2. Was there a reason for 2? Was there...
The game changed enough in between, like, the first demo and kind of the direction we were taking the script.
I see.
So it's like the first demo, there were only like 6 different chapter 2 princesses, and we wanted to make sure that the final demo reflected, like, the full 10 we were going with. And then we also just saw that as an opportunity to, you know, bring something new and exclusive to PAX East that year.
Yeah, knowing that we were going to be showing a demo, we wanted it to reflect what the game was going to be better, and we wanted it to be more interesting. So.
More polished.
More polished.
Is there you were mentioning 50-20 minutes. Is that the magic number of where you want people to try the game, have a good taste, and be able to walk away? Anything longer, shorter than that?
That was just the length that a single run wound up being.
Okay.
I think it was good for being able to hook people quickly, but that is definitely not the amount of time that we want people to be, like, satisfied with it. We want it to be a hook, and then that draws you into the rest of the game, which takes hours. So
and I mean, like, if you're looking for every ending in the demo, that's like a 2-hour experience.
Right.
That,
so you still, if you want to spend more time in it, you can, but you don't have to. And I think that that's good to kind of engage more people. It wasn't something we, like, necessarily set out with in mind. It just happened that way.
Did you guys seek extra help with the second game? Do you guys just kind of build off of what you learned from the first, in terms of, like, either contracting or marketing, indie marketing, or anything, and why exactly?
So we hired PR help.
Okay.
We worked with Stride for that. They were great. And yeah, that was just like, you have to send a lot of emails when you're marketing a game. And I was sick of it. I figured people who already had press contacts would be helpful there. They did a great job. And then one of the things we were doing when we started work on Slay the Princess is just across the board, we were scoping it up to be much smaller than Scarlet Hollow, because Scarlet Hollow was just becoming a behemoth to work on. And it's like we were talking about earlier, it's tough to just, like, start to finish bootstrap your way through a 5-year development cycle. But the smaller scope let us bring in help for areas that would just be infeasible for Scarlet Hollow. Namely, we were able to have voice acting, which I think was absolutely huge for the game. We were able to land a couple of extremely talented actors for that. And it also put us in a position where it's like, now that the game's doing really well, we can afford to localize it, where it's like, so the final word count for Slay the Princess, including the expansion, is like 190,000 words, which, you know, brings, like, the cost of localization, if you're using professional services, to, like, somewhere between 20 and 30 grand a language, which is feasible, and, like, you can project an ROI off of that.
whereas like Scarlet Hollow is going to be something like 1.3 million words when it's done. And that would mean it would be like close to $250,000 per language, and it's just like, obviously the market really can't support that. Like if the game sold 10 times better than it was selling now, then maybe for 1 or 2 languages it would be feasible. But I think it's just like the scope of that one pigeonholes it into being an English only text.
Right. Which localization, what kind of success are you seeing with that in terms of like, we're glad we did it, and this is something that would advise new developers, like, think about it. And which language exactly is the biggest ROI?
Ask us in 4 months.
Okay, so you're in the mid process of learning.
We're in the middle of it, and it's releasing alongside the director's cut this fall.
Okay.
So we're doing 12 languages though. So we're doing traditional and simplified Chinese, counting that as 2 because different enough, separate teams. Same with Latin American and European Spanish, and then we're doing Brazilian Portuguese. We're doing French, Italian, German, Polish, Japanese, Korean, and Russian.
Wow.
So really,
that must be pretty exciting, huh? They're just seeing how all that. It's a whole new audience.
It's both exciting and completely overwhelming. Every morning I wake up and have like 20 to 30 questions from localizers to answer. So the game is written in a very like symbolic and metaphorical way, which is
hard to
often there are things that I don't even realize are like idioms or expressions or metaphors that someone is like, what does this mean? And I'm like, oh, no. How do I describe this without using another idiom accidentally?
What an interesting process. It seems like you guys are constantly. This is where I feel like a lot of teams that have found success continue to be successful. It's just like every game you kind of learn something new, and you add on to that, and you kind of broaden your audience by doing that. And the most important thing about it is the team stays the same and grows the team size instead of just always mix and matching, which is what the bigger teams are having trouble with. A lot of people leave or other things that happens, and game 1 that you love, game 2 is not quite the same. It's funny, like you're the 3rd person today that mentioned Mass Effect just out of the blue. There's no new Mass Effect, but there's like all these shows that are being successful now that I was like, man, I would love the Mass Effect. He was like, yeah, it'd be great. Yeah. If they do that. But like the Mass Effect team, unfortunately, mostly are not together anymore, and it's just those type of things that I feel like as a creative, it's so important to continue to be successful. That just because of how the industry is, you just can't have that all the time.
Yeah, I think there's this thing where people they perceive brands as almost people.
Right.
That makes sense, right? Yeah. Where it's like
they think that this brand will always make things of this quality when really it was a team who made that. And most of the team has been fired.
Or
and
the project stopped.
Or they just left because not many people stay with the same place for a decade, right? Blizzard that made Diablo 4 is just not the Blizzard that made Diablo 2. Yeah. It's a Ship of Theseus situation. So, it's tricky. Right. Like one of the good things about being such a tiny studio is the core team is pretty much exactly the same project for project. Maybe we'll bring in voice talent for one. Maybe we won't.
Yeah, that is something that independent creators kind of can hold on to, which is the small team. And as long as nothing catastrophic happens between them, they can use their collective experience to keep making things that at least have a similar vibe to what they made before, but better.
But the big studios they're effectively publishers that have, in-house dev teams. And it's like, are you going to, at the end of the day, like, are your tastes built around seeing A24 films, or are they built around seeing what Ari Aster's been up to? I think that even if sort of the larger brands, the publishers, the production companies, even if they wind up absorbing a lot of the recognition, and this is a huge challenge in the space. At the end of the day, it's like the devs are the folks making the games, and that's something to keep sight of, right?
Yeah. In terms of roadmap, right? I'm sure there's a billion ideas that you guys want to try, but you're in self-control in terms of scope, because it's like, we're growing, we're learning. There's certain things we got to accomplish before we want to do the ultimate game, let's say, right? How do you guys balance that in terms of having 2 successful projects already, having a ton of more experience than when you guys started? How are you guys able to start constructing that roadmap of one day we'll try this, but not yet? And how do you kind of keep each other in check to make sure that we're keeping in line with our goals, to build it smart, basically?
Sure. I mean, we already tried doing 2 things at once, and it was like it worked out.
Yeah.
As a play, phenomenally, but it was excruciating. Yeah. Like I think the last time we talked, I don't know if I had any gray hair, and like my hair is like half gone silver at this point. I'm 32.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's definitely a lot. And fortunately now I think our timelines are kind of paced out by deadlines. Yeah. So we have to finish Scarlet Hollow. So we're going to finish
the only
that.
Thing we're working on until we're done.
Yeah. We're just going to finish it. We now, Slay the Princess has allowed us to just have the funds to be able to finish a project like this. So that's going to be really complicated. Episode 5 is already very complicated. And then I'm going to finish a webcomic that I started when I was like 21. And I had to put it on hold because of all of the other projects that paid more. So here we are. And then perhaps another game. Who knows? But that's kind of how we're able to pace it out. And we can kind of figure out where our skills have grown, and kind of match the next project to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, so it's like right now we sometimes talk about a third game, but it's just a fun conversation we have once every 3 months when we're driving somewhere and have run out of other things to talk about, where that idea just comes back in. And like, I feel like our current third game thing is finally at a place where we've had many different ideas and they all get replaced within like 3 months. And it's like,
kind of get changed into something else and fit into other ideas we have.
But I'm like kind of fond of the thing we have right now, but I'm in no rush to get started.
Yeah.
Scarlet Hollow is just like such a ridiculously ambitious project. So it's not like we're being held back by prior obligations. If anything, like I think the skills that we developed over the course of working on Slay the Princess were the necessary like level up needed to do this episode, which like that was a thing that was really great about the episodic structure of Scarlet Hollow in general, where it was like, episode 1 was the first game we ever made. It was a learning experience, and the lessons we learned there meant that we could do the things we wanted to do with episode 2, and we could make it better. And the things we learned with episode 2 went into episode 3 and made that better. And then that's sort of what fed into Slay the Princess. We started that demo, and then we finished episode 4 between Slay the Princess's demo and working on the rest of Slay the Princess full time. And it was like, that demo is what leveled us up enough to do what we needed to do for episode 4, which leveled us up enough to do what we needed to do with Slay the Princess, which leveled us up enough for the director's cut, which is finally like leveled us up enough for episode 5 of Scarlet Hollow. So it's like, it's one of those things where one, I think it's good to set just like this kind of growing curve of ambition over time, so you can fill into that cup and fit the shape of it. But you're also just always going to be taking the things you've learned from previous projects and almost like instinctively applying them to the next one. Like there's this thing in episode 4 of Scarlet Hollow where there's like these paint monsters, right? And we wanted to give them kind of like a bit of a shifting ethereal quality because they're like made of liquid. And when we were working on the Slay the Princess demo, we had to learn how to do like OpenGL shaders to create a boil effect. So like that art has its shifting quality. So it was something where it's like, we're running into this new problem and suddenly we have a solution from work we've already done, so we can apply it here and then move on to the next step.
Yeah. I think as I get older, quality of life is definitely it's the main motivation for everything. I can do that, make more money there, or I could do this and be what it feels like more successful, right? But at the end of the day, I was like, I want to just enjoy what I'm doing at the same time. So there's always like that back and forth of kind of scaling back over ambition or doing stuff. And I talk to developers, and they're always in that in the middle there, where I'm trying to figure out what's the balance because to them it's like, especially the indie developers, it's not so much about going 120%, right? It's about sustainability, which is what Jake is the king of, right? Jake Burkett, he's the indie sustainable master, right? For like
he's
20
still going. He's still
going. And I ever since I talked to him, to be honest, it seems like, man, this is how you're supposed to build games. It's just don't sit in a cave for like 10 years, right? Get your content out there as when it makes sense to players. Get that feedback and, like you said, level up from that experience. Because there's, I think, as a creative output, it's nice to be isolated and make things, but the other half of it is just seeing how people receive it at the same time. Because I think that's the business side part of it. But as an entertainer, it's nice to kind of see people enjoying your work too. It kind of pushes you to the next step. So I admire what you guys do. You guys been saying this since 2019. I think the last time we talked was around 2020, 2021 or something.
We started in 2020. So I'm going to guess it was like 21 or.
Yeah, it was around that time when we first talked, but it was great to kind of see how you guys developed that concept, continued on, and seeing that starting to translate to other studios, like the idea of just being small and build your community more than ever now. I think the amount of games that are out there, there's definitely like buyer's choice is infinite right now.
Yeah.
And even more important,
too many, I would say.
Yeah. Even more important is just like, you just got to carve your own audience and be able to talk to them. What makes them want to buy your game versus the others? Just simply they know you, or, you have some kind of relation. And that's the future proofing that every developer needs to think about, instead of relying on an outside third party to sell the game for you. You got to have some kind of connection there. I would like to say this is the top of the hour. I want to thank you for giving 1 hour of you guys' busy schedule. All right. This is the part where I actually shut up and hand over the mic so that you guys can talk directly to the listeners and viewers out there about anything. Go for it.
Gosh.
Pristine cut coming this fall.
All right.
Look out. Slay the Princess is coming to consoles. So
yeah, that'll be great.
Yeah.
Episode 5 of Scarlet Hollow coming out next year.
Yep.
Buy our games, play our games. Slay the Princess has a demo. Scarlet Hollow has free first episode on Steam. So try it before you buy it.
Mm-hmm. Have fun.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. This was so lovely.
Of course. I'm following you guys' journey. I just been so happy seeing like success that you guys have been getting lately, right, with everything. And it's very inspiring, right? I'd say, especially this last year and a half. So it's great that you guys did this before everything, figured this out to a certain aspect. And I hope this message is good for all the listeners out there. It's never too late to start. If anything, now is a good time to kind of think about it. But as always, nice to have you. See you guys all next week.